Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Arsenal Pass Time in the Round, episode 13. Today, we are joined by Taylor Morrow, also known as the Falcon of the West. Taylor is one of the hosts for the Attack Action podcast, a weekly flesh and blood podcast that's centered around the competitive side of the game with a pinch of whimsy and friendship. Taylor, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great after that that pretty fun intro there. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, I'm happy to finally have you on. I know we kindled our friendship in Vegas. I accidentally, It's actually kind of funny. I was messaging Taylor before. He was on like Thursday night. I was like, yeah, let's get dinner, all this stuff. And I just don't check my social media, and I kind of ignored him. Randomly ran into you at the venue. I was like, yo, why didn't you hit me up? But I'm really happy we got to meet. We got to go to dinner. It was super nice. I'm sure we'll have a great time if we get to kind of run into each other at another event. But speaking of that event, Taylor, let's hear kind of a breakdown of your Las Vegas calling experience.
Yeah, so it went pretty well. I accomplished like all of the goals I personally set out for myself. In terms of like what I wanted to do with my play and that sort of thing. And so that was really great. And I got to meet you and Dante, which was also, if you're playing the drinking game at home, when I say Dante Delfico, that also counts. It's not just
people in trouble.
Sweet. Jonah brutality. Take a shot.
Yeah. Oh man, dude, careful, careful. The power you wield. So I got to meet you guys, and we had a great time. That was probably one of the highlights. Was getting to make new friends and that sort of thing. So. In terms of the main event, I went 8-3. So I made day 2 and wound up with 25th place in the calling.
Mm-hmm. What your record on day 1 was X1, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you were on chain as well?
Yeah, as well. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Where did you take your losses, by the way?
Oh, round 6.
Mm-hmm.
And then so day 1, round 6, and then round 9 and 10. So I took kind of back-to-back losses on day 2, which sucked.
What heroes?
I lost a Prism and the Mirror.
Yeah.
So
great run though. Like I remember seeing. I was obviously at home watching. Didn't get to meet you this time, Taylor, but next time. But I was sat at home and I saw the standings come up after day 1. And I was like, get in! Like Taylor's up there. I think you were like at that time like 15th or something. I was like, come on, let's go.
14th.
Day 2, let's go. So I mean, great run, right? Like 1 extra round going your way in 9 or 10, and you're pretty close to top 8 there. So good stuff.
Thanks. Yeah, it was. A bit of variance. Felt like it really hit me on day 2. More than like really just getting outplayed. But I mean, that's just like the format and how it was kind of gonna go. So
Speaking of the format, what did you think of the the almost like need to X1 day 1 to make top 8, and sometimes even X1 to make day 2? And what did you think about how on day 2 there was people that had qualified but it was statistically impossible for them to top 8? What did you think of that system?
I didn't like it so much. I don't mind the like pressure of having to go X1 to make day 2, but then it like hardly anybody played day 2 because all the X and 2s just like have no chance.
Yeah.
So that's like it's like, what are you playing for then? Even then you have to kind of go like 4-0 day 2 to like even get top 32 to get your $200 or whatever. I think so. You're just like not playing for anything, even though they cut to top 64. So it seems like a bit of a waste.
It's a bit funky, right? I was pretty surprised. I don't know if that was because of like there was more numbers than expected, or if that was the original plan. But it does make more sense in the context of like they expanded out the prize pool. So it used to be a bit more top 8 heavy. I think maybe it was
only top 8 heavy.
Which right. And like now that they've brought it down to top 16, I guess it makes sense, right? Because you like compete for your $200
Or 32, right?
whatever.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's top 32.
Yeah.
Which is that's interesting. It's kind of an interesting. I don't know if they're going to keep it going forward because I don't think that like even for the people that went in the favor of, I don't know if anybody was really a fan of the idea of making day 2 and then most of the probably most of the people from like 40 down just kind of dropped anyway. It was like might as well cut the top 32, right?
Yeah, especially with like the ProQuest on Sunday, like you have a better chance of starting over and doing that than you do, doing anything in day 2 except for Pride if you're like an X and 2,
Yeah. I think it's okay. Like I don't think it's the worst thing. I think as well they're trying to juggle numbers, right? Like they basically had to take a stab in the dark at where they thought numbers were going to be. There is something that they could do in the future, which is just be a little more flexible with their scalability of the rounds, depending on how many players actually end up registering. But I think the difficulty with that is obviously they had coverage going on. They wanted to be like planned down to close to the minute, I'm guessing, in terms of the way they did that. And it did. I thought from the side watching at home, like it did run pretty smoothly from that side. I think one thing that I've seen in other events like this, if you compare it to, I don't know, like a GP for Magic or other events of the scale, one of the things they do is if they actually have potentially about 12 rounds and they'll make a cut to day 2 and then they'll play one more round on the first day. So they don't actually increase the number of rounds on day 2, which can be a bit of an issue, but they make the cut at the same time. So you get this cleaner cut, but then people play the round, and then it's really easy to say, okay, well, people know if they're going to be in contention or not, and then you go into the next day. There's no sort of I'm at X2. I need to do some math to work this out. It's like you're at the cut, you're at X1, and then you might lose your first round for the day, and then you have, if you feel at that point, actually mathematically you still could make the top 8, but at that point you might opt to drop and go play the ProQuest. So I don't know. That would be my maybe thought that it might change in the future and could be a good way to do it, but we'll have to see. I mean, 11 rounds felt kind of odd to me. It felt like if you're going to do 11, why not just do 12? I thought.
Yeah, especially because of the way the math worked out. But I also want to talk a little bit because we haven't talked about it, I think, on the channel yet. Just the atmosphere, right? So, so like I don't think we've told anybody kind of how it was. So
I wasn't there, Brennan, surprisingly.
Yeah, I'll start off. So yeah, it was incredible. It was like you really, I think you felt like it felt like you were experiencing something historic in the game, and it felt just the scale of it was so much bigger than anything that you kind of could have imagined. Obviously, you can pull on like old experiences with other games, whether it's a GP or maybe something else. But just being there, kind of at like this mecca of flesh and blood at the very beginning, when that we're going just in the absolute right direction, was just very electric. It was crazy. Like I've never seen more than 100 people, I think, in a room that were looking to play Flesh and Blood, and this was like we were talking like over 1,000 on the world premiere specifically. So that was just incredible, and it was kind of a shock. Like the experience of going from in the world premiere, going from opponent to opponent, and every single time it was just like a new player that was like had their own story and their own journey into like what what looked like from the outside initially before this event, like a small game. Was just pretty awesome. Like, you got people from all different kinds of walks of life. Some people had been in for a year. Some had just started playing today. Some been in for 3 months. And there was just like, I don't know, it was cool kind of thinking about, back when I had gone to like a Magic GP, I played casually, but, I'd hear these people talk with their Flesh and Blood decks and they're like, yeah, like it's just like, I got this Warrior deck. Like I really like Warrior. We do this in our local meta and that. And just really expanded like the entire picture of what this game is and like what it could be. So it was definitely an awesome experience. What did you think, Taylor, of what were your first impressions of the calling?
I was just like so excited, like that's the most people I've seen since March of 2020 in one place, like so that was pretty insane. And that's like the first huge card tournament or game tournament thing that I have like ever been to. I've been to like plenty of sporting events and that sort of thing, but never something that big, that was like something I signed up to do or whatever. So the energy was like very, very palpable, but was like I don't know, maybe it was just me, but it was weirdly calm at the same time. Like I expected there to be a lot more anxiety
Mhm.
in the room than there really was. But
Why do you
yeah.
think there wasn't? Like, do you think that was the event staff and how they handled it, or what was your kind of thought about that?
Oh, I don't know. I think there was maybe less people playing to win the calling than I expected, right? So like,
Mhm.
and that's not I don't mean that offensively to anybody, you know. I think there was just like, you know, I don't know, 30 people maybe that truly thought like, or that were there to like win it, you know what I mean? And the rest of everybody was just like happy to play in the event, it seemed like. So it was like as long as they got 7 rounds in, they were stoked, you know.
Yeah. I think the way the main event was run in particular definitely kind of reduced, I don't know if you want to call it like anxiety, right? Because it was very
Yeah.
smooth, especially with like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
all online and stuff. Like it's so easy. And I personally had no troubles like ever finding my table, submitting my
Right.
results, except for the world premiere. The world
Yeah.
premiere, I did
That was
randomly,
rough.
but I also did randomly get a loss. Like I won a game and then like it was recorded as a loss. But luckily, it didn't
Mhm.
happen on the main. In the main event though, it was like super chill, and very well run. And I think the only round that was like kind of brutal was like round 1. We had a bit of a delay there. After that, we were smooth sailing. Which, if
Yeah.
you've been to callings before, that is not very on brand. So it
Yeah.
was it was incredibly well run, and I was super pumped. And yeah, like I don't know, like also like the Flesh and Blood. Maybe it's because the card game is so young and everybody was so excited, but the attitude of everybody was so positive and kind of
Yeah.
open. Like everybody was so excited to play, and it was less about, you know, I don't know, just didn't have any bad experiences, which is like if you, I don't know, I think in some other card games it's a bit more popular,
Right.
to have like at least some kind of neutral or negative experiences as you progress through the main event. With Flesh and Blood, like everybody was so excited to play that I don't know, it just felt relaxed, even though there's so much on the line.
Yeah, totally.
It's a pretty cool thing to have, I
I
think. But you go tell.
Well, I would say my one critique was, and this is just probably due to like the newness of the game, was that some of the judge calls I heard about and just like the officiating in general was, you know, for me, for this like a professional level event, was like a little subpar for what I think it should be at, you know. But it's mainly just because the game's so new. You know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all my call, like I had a couple rules calls outside the main event, so into the world premiere, because obviously who knows what the heck is going on when you're playing with the new cards, but everything there
Mhm.
was handled really well. And then I had one like rules related question by an opponent who was totally wrong. And then he called the judge and they informed him that that was incorrect. It was but like it was just exactly like, I mean, that was 100% the way the rules worked out. Um and yeah, they were
Yeah,
very,
I
very
had some
professional about it.
friends. Yeah, I had some friends like on the wrong end of like how reprise when is reprise checked, you know, or that heralds count when like hit effects count if you hit Urser and stuff like that, you know.
If you've
Just like
attacked before, right? Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a funky one. I think that I don't know if that ruling came out in one of JJ's, like, you know, if like he like describes like those kind of weird, yeah, those weird situations, and that was the one that was mentioned. But yeah, that one's a funky one for sure, because like you have to actually pull up like a document outside of the comprehensive game
Yeah,
rules to
yeah, yeah. And
figure
those
it out.
are like, you know, that's just really being nitpicky and that sort of thing. But
Mhm.
You're
I
allowed to
just
be.
know about them. Yeah.
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 Oh, I was
Go
going to
ahead,
say,
Hayden.
yeah, I was just going to say one of the things that I thought from like an outside perspective as well, and it sounds like from what all the things I heard from people, even from both of you speaking right now, one of the coolest things that I think has come out of this this first big US calling is, I think there was a perception of Flesh and Blood that it was really for like collectors or investors and for like spikes, right? Like the really ultra
Yeah.
competitive players and for investors and collectors. And I think it's been pretty disproven this past weekend with Vegas and the amount of people that showed up for the world premiere, that there is a player base for this game that isn't just those two groups. There's a ton of different groups of players that want to play this game, be it from, the role-playing casual experience of what this game gives you with heroes to people who just want to play card games. I mean, at the end of the day, right, Brendan, we're a bit more of a competitive-focused podcast and YouTube channel, but we love playing cards. We love the game, and I don't think anyone else that's out there would deny that there's an affinity to this game when you play it. I think, right? I think you just saw so many players with that sort of feeling during the world premiere.
Yeah, that gives me a lot of hope, because actually my biggest worry about Flesh and Blood, like over everything, my biggest worry is that it's too low variance and too consistent, where people might get a little fed up with the game because maybe like a certain group of players or like a certain player just wins too much. And I felt like the calling didn't play out like that at all. Like a lot of people were live for day 2 and live for top 8 that could have been, newer to the game, or maybe didn't go there to win, but it had played well and kind of earned their spot. And I was really happy to see that, because that is my biggest concern. For me, it wasn't a big concern until people brought it up to me and mentioned that other card games that had been sort of like this had died before. But after playing the world premiere and playing the main event, like so many people that were there, that were just bringing like the hero that they like playing, like ranger, warrior, whatever it is, and just having a really good time. Because I think that maybe something that makes Flesh and Blood able to succeed past, maybe some of the barriers to entry, with it being a bit higher skill capped, is that it's actually just fun to play the game. Like you can lose the game and it can still be fun. And I think a lot of games of Flesh and Blood appear closer than they are sometimes on like life totals and something like this. So you don't get like absolutely like locked out and stomped like you might. Even if you play like Magic the Gathering, like if you played like against like a turns deck, like that's just a terrible experience sometimes. Where like in Flesh and Blood, I feel like you have, you have a reasonably good time almost every game.
It's the genius of the design, I think, to make these games even, you can sit there and as someone who's maybe has experience, you're sitting there going, this game isn't close, but it does look close. And I think for a lot of people that feels close, and that's all that people want, right? Is to feel like they got to play a competitive game and they didn't just sit down and immediately lose the game when they sat down, or 2 turns into the game they've made multiple mistakes, maybe, or suboptimal plays that have put them out of the game completely. Whereas because of turn cycles and because of the fact you draw hands back up, there's no real one play that's going to lose you a game completely. So I think that's the appeal of the game, to help offset some of the lower variance, which is great.
Yeah, and you can't lose on turn 1, which is great.
You played Blitz?
You don't just get locked out of the game.
You played Blitz, I guess there's some niche scenarios in Blitz,
very, very niche.
What our spell is. But I know it's great. Like that is like what will save us. Because who knows where like the ceiling of Flesh and Blood gameplay is. Like obviously, like probably we look back in 5 years, everybody who's playing the game right now will look back and then be like, oh, everybody was bad back then, because that's just the natural progression of players. Because like we look back and like Welcome to Wraith, we were all bad back then for sure compared to now. And it's like, once we get to like, maybe we get in like 2, 3, maybe 5 years, and there are players that have just kind of gotten so far ahead where they get so consistent, and like that is probably one of the worries I had more. But it doesn't look like it's going to happen, and it looks like the game is fun, kind of regardless of that, if that was the case. So that makes me really happy, and there's a lot of hope there. And obviously the hero centric role playing side of the game is huge. Like you don't really realize how big that is if you're just like kind of a, I remember there was like a quote, like there's like some Magic players say they would play the game on Excel if they had to, because it's all about the competition. But like the fact that there is kind of this role playing aspect. There's so many people that I played against and that I met that were there just for that. Like they brought their brew, they brought their ranger deck, they brought something they felt personally invested in, and that was what was fun for them.
Shout out to Isaac.
One homie from totally. That's what I was gonna say. That's Isaac's MO. He's like pretty attached to his characters for sure, and wants to like play them really well. And another homie from Northern California, his like whole goal was to just be the best ranger player, there. And that's like, I think he did it too,
Yeah. You had your friend too that would just played side events. I forget his name. He was just grinding events.
Yeah. He was a man in the wind. You'd see him for like a second and he's like, oh, I got another side event. And then he'd just be gone. And you're like trying to coordinate dinner with him and stuff. And he's like, I got another round. It was awesome.
Yeah. Cause I know that since when you didn't make top 8, you're actually able to join me in the Tales of Aria draft at like 2:30 p.m. on Sunday.
That was sick.
How sick
But
was that?
I was too tired to fully enjoy it.
Were you guys in the same pod?
It was awesome.
No. They were assigned
cool.
pods, and there was a ton of people drafting at that slot.
Yeah.
But it was so cool. Like, I mean, the idea like of first getting the world premiere and seeing the cards for the first time before anybody, it's like all very fresh. It's fresh for literally everyone because no one could have studied the spoilers, and then drafting as well. Oh, what a treat. It was like my favorite part. I can't wait for the next world premiere that we get to experience.
Yeah,
hopefully Hayden will join us.
Yeah, for sure. That would be awesome. I took my draft like very seriously, like pack one, pick one, and then probably for the whole first pack in in all the signals I got, I was like, all right, everybody's just picking foils and whatever. So I'm just gonna just not care anymore.
Might not be quite the same as the Nationals draft.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was me. I was staying open and I was like in ice, and I was just like, what the heck is going on here?
Yeah.
But I had a good time. My deck was pretty fun. Drafted a Lexi deck actually. But I just kind of want to zoom back out into the Falcon of the West here. So Taylor, tell me kind of how you got into the game, and also how and why you started a podcast. Did you have experience with podcasting? Like, what was your goal when you first started out?
Okay. First question. It's the pandemic and needed something to do, kind of. Well, okay, so me and Isaac played Star Wars Destiny for maybe like a couple of years. And that was like our first card game we were like kind of serious about since like, maybe junior high, playing Magic or something like that. And then we were kind of sniffing around for another game to kind of fill that void, and tried a bunch of different stuff. And then kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, Team Covenant like previewed Flesh and Blood, and I had seen it before and was like, I don't know. What's with this like stuff on the board, and that I don't know about this. But then I had a more open mind and was like, oh, this is really cool. I get to like see the cards I pitch. That's pretty exciting. So I bought some product and taught Isaac the game, and he was like hooked instantly. And then that was kind of it. And then maybe after a month, maybe even less of playing, I'd always wanted to start a podcast. I just have like had quite a few jobs in the past where I listened to a lot of podcasts just doing monotonous work or driving or something. So we didn't really have a lot going on, unemployed and stuff at the time. And so we were just like, sure, let's start a podcast. And it's like the ground floor of the game basically in the US. And so we just put it out there and started podcasting, and now it's been a whole year.
Yeah, and I saw that you were reaping the benefits of that too. You're signing a playmat, and I saw all that stuff. I remember this is funny because Taylor was complaining.
Mr. Hang out at the calling, and people come up and don't look at you, and they're just like, Brendan, what's up? Like, I listen to your podcast. I'm playing Chain because you play it, etc. And you're just standing there like, I was having a conversation with him, But so that's what it's like hanging out with Brendan at a calling.
Taylor was at dinner with us on Saturday, and he was like, yeah, man, I was wearing our t-shirt and like nobody came up. And then on Sunday, I remember Sunday was the first time I actually kind of like saw him. I saw Taylor like at an event because he was, other than that, we were just grinding the main event, not seeing him between rounds and stuff. And then lo and behold, he was signing playmats, talking to his fans. And I was like, Taylor, you got me. You put me on, you gave me a whole guilt trip. And then here we go. A big celebrity out here.
You've got to remember as well, Taylor, this mug, this Brendan Patrick face and hair, it's very, very, very noticeable. So
it's a beacon. It's a beacon. He's wearing all black with the white hair. You could see him out of 1,000 people, no problem. Yeah,
it was
all black.
Very on
the
brand.
Reaper.
It was awesome though. It's so cool. Like that was probably one of my favorite experiences. But that's actually like, I mean that's probably
getting to sign autographs was your favorite.
No. Just talking to people who like consume the Arsenal Pass content, because like the things that people said was, I mean, I was very surprised to hear some things that people were saying, like they were very nice, and I did not expect that. And I think that that's like an experience that kind of transcends like the calling, right? Like that was like a life experience. I was like, wow, like I kind of worked hard at something and put myself out there, and like some people enjoyed it and it impacted them in a positive way, and that's like a very interesting kind of feeling to have, right? It feels very good, and I appreciate everyone who came up to me. That was very kind.
Taylor, I gotta ask. So when you and Isaac started the Attack Action podcast, did you guys have like a focus in mind, or did you just want to talk about the game? Like I've listened to a lot of your episodes, and I feel like they've evolved a lot as you've gone along. Did you start out with just wanting to just talk about your experience and your journey with the game, and then that's kind of evolved as you started to go to events?
Yeah, totally. Well, like in the US, I don't know what we were thinking we were going to talk about. Because like after Crucible comes out, right? That's like episode 3 for us. Then you basically have to make up stuff to talk about, because there's like no competitive scene, and then all of a sudden Skirmish is there, and we have something to talk about, and then that's done, and then there's like no new release or whatever for like 7 months. So, when we first started, we just were like, whatever, we'll talk about whatever, basically. And then it just kind of evolved into our journey as players from like basically square one to where we are now,
Yeah, which I really liked. I thought that was a great insight to, because I listened back to a lot of your pods, because I didn't join in at the start, so I listened back and just like hearing how you guys started to become more attached to the game, especially Isaac. I feel like every time you guys pod, he's like more passionate about a certain hero or a certain like set of cards. Or that's great.
Totally, that's his whole thing. He's got his like pet hero, his pet cards, but he like does well, and what he's really good at too is playing the player, so like he'll smoke me sometimes, and I'm like, how is this possible? This is a 70-40 or 70-30 in my favor, or whatever. But it's all good.
It's funny. I haven't listened back yet, but I remember I first got introduced to the Attack Action podcast because Hayden went on there, and then he was like, "Hey, you should listen to it." And I listened to it, and they were just shit talking me, man. You guys are just dogging on me. It's getting me. But that was. I remember I learned that Hayden, that was the first time I ever learned that Hayden was a dancer. Didn't tell me. So all these kind of facts about Hayden Dale, I've known him for a year. He just doesn't tell me anything. And then I have to go on the other podcast. But I really enjoyed it. I think that you guys have something special over there that I actually believe will grow quite a bit as we progress and more people find out about you and give you that first shot, because I think once I do, they'll be hooked. It's good stuff.
Hopefully we have a bit more cred now that like we've done a bit of winning. Hopefully that gives us some cred, but it is what it is. And yeah, I mean, I've known Isaac since we were 6, playing on the same like little league soccer team.
That's awesome. That's crazy. What awesome.
Yeah, it is nuts.
I'm just going to kind of put this out here. I'm going to let both of you take it away. Maybe Hayden, you can take it first. Sure. Let's just talk about Tales of Aria, but let's talk about Constructed. Let's talk about a little bit of Constructed impacts, what your first thoughts are, where you think maybe some top meta decks are going to be like as the meta shifts initially. And yeah, just give me your initial thoughts.
Sure, I can kick us off. Do you know what? I think that the deck building of this format is super difficult. That's kind of my first takeaway is, starting to look at some builds or how you look at these 3 new heroes. The balance of making your deck powerful, making it synergistic, and making it consistent is really, really difficult to do, because you need to have a certain amount of, if you want to focus on the power coming from some of your fuse cards, then you need to have the element cards to pay for those, and then those cards generally aren't super strong. So, and then those cards generally don't have a ton of synergy with other powerful non-fuse cards. So there's this real, so far my takeaway is there's like a real balance to how you need to build these heroes, and I'm not sure, to be honest, that I even have a great idea of how I want to do this to start with. Of course, we've been more focused on limited to start with Brendan, but have been dabbling into a bit of constructed and thinking about classic constructed in particular. And that's just one thing that's really, really sort of struck me is how am I going to build these? I would say that of the heroes, though, I do think sort of Lexi initially feels like the one where I feel like my ability to balance the consistency, the power, and the synergies is a bit easier. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But that's kind of my first takeaway. There's some really powerful stuff in the set, though. What are your thoughts, Connor? What do you think about Taylor?
Well, so what I did was I put away all of my cards, like everything for Road to Nats and stuff, so I can like have a fresh mind. I like took apart every deck I had played so I can just like look at everything. And kind of like you said, like there's beyond resources, you have your fusion cards and stuff, and which increases your like block twos ratio. So you have like all these different ratios now that you might not have had to deal with before, which makes it really tough. But so my big takeaway is that I think just Viserai and Bravo like get the bump immediately, right? Because they get some like new cards and you already know how to play that deck and that sort of thing, So even though we have all these like taxes and stuff, it still is just like, probably still too hard to figure out how to play that, I don't know. It feels really clunky, I guess, is how it feels because I don't know what to do.
You don't know what you're attacking, right? You don't know what you're trying to play into at the moment.
Yeah.
I think one of the things about the Bravo and Viserai, though, is that those naturally potentially have ways to be good into ice, which feels like if you can find a deck that maybe has some sort of play into the previous meta and also can deal with ice, then you probably have a good start to somewhere to start in this format. And of course, Viserai, you can play cards that reduce your cost. These attack actions that have reduced cost, which also works favorably with the Frostbite tokens. And then Bravo, you just play big stuff. You don't have to go as wide. So cards like Blizzard,
dual hammer.
Yeah,
correct.
Dual hammer. If you want to take it that way, you can just.
Yeah. It's so I have most of my sights on like mid-range decks. So this is going to be, you mentioned Viserai, so Viserai is probably top of my list.
Yeah, same.
And then it's more like Levia and Rhinar. I'm looking
at Rhinar, right? Cleans up right now.
Yeah, honestly, because Rhinar just punishes, I think, like, if someone tries to get too cute with stuff, especially when it comes to Frost, like Rhinar can really punish that, especially because like low block values and just like sort of like a clunkier build. I think Rhinar can be pretty devastating towards that kind of strategy.
And he forces you to block with cards you don't want to.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah.
So if you need to hold on to your Earth card, you got to block with it, and it's for 2.
Yeah. I'm a bit worried for my boy Kano, especially in Blitz. Like, Frostbite tokens don't look great, especially for the way that I like to play Kano. Looks like you're going to be like heavily incentivized to actually play on the opponent's turn, and before the tokens come out, and kind of just be drawing up. That was what I was thinking. I was taking my dog out this morning. I was like, man, is Kano just dead? It's like I can't pay 4 for his ability. And I was like, oh, I guess you just have to kind of play more on the opponent's turn if they're Frost, and then try to go off the top. The deck that I do have that I am like the deck I want to build and the deck I'm looking at, and this is actually like this is progress for me because I am not the deck builder, but I've been having like waking up in the morning, I'm like,
what's going on? Where's Brendan?
Yeah, I'm thinking like Lexi taxes, like some sort of just very disruptive, and probably kind of like just very disruptive like Frost deck that has maybe has a win con through the bottom pitch by sacking like a big dominate or something, or just has it inherently. It can but throughout the game is basically just tempoing out the opponent as much as possible. Because like Lexi's card pool to do that is just so incredible. Not only are you creating all these Frostbite tokens, but you can also have like these on hit effects and make people discard and just it looks really good. But Lexi's hard to conceptualize even after playing limited because like I think one of the biggest factors is actually like the legendary hood. So like you have to kind of like balance how that works, and that's really where I feel like quite a bit of the power comes from. And then also like Voltaire is a bit different than Shiver. So
very different.
That's what I'm kind of working on in my mind. But Usually I just kind of wait for Hayden to hand me decks, and I just tweak it, and they get yelled at for messing up the ratios.
I'm actually I'm struggling to start with. Although I haven't really had much of a thought about it. I've thrown a couple of decks together and just given some try, and then given up because I didn't spend enough time, and then the decks are bad and clunky. But one of the things that so I spent a lot of time with Levia in the previous format with Monarch, especially the back half of Monarch, and the deck building in this format reminds me a lot of trying to balance a Levia deck where you're not just thinking about your ratios, your power cards, and maybe some like for Chain it was like your blood deck cards. With Levia, you're like, okay, I have the specific blood deck cards, I have the 6 power cards, I have the brute cards. Like there's so many different resources to manage in your deck building, and that's how it feels like with Tales of Aria as well. It feels very similar to trying to build an optimal Levia deck. So yeah, I'm excited to get into it. I think it's just going to be a very slow process to start with. I think there's going to be a lot of janky builds in our testing to start with that immediately get sort of put to the side. And some of the cards that feel intuitively like they shouldn't be good or that they shouldn't work with certain strategies are actually going to be cards I think are going to end up shining a lot more than we might think. So yeah.
Yeah. And there's the like question that everybody's asking, like, what if I just do one element? Can I do that? Or potentially playing out all of your one element, of a certain type of element cards, and then stack your bottom of your deck for a completely different flavor. There's like that.
I haven't thought of that. That's that sounds crazy. So you
right.
Just play out the ice at tempo, and then you play out like lightning to kind of finish the game. Oh, that is spicy.
Tough to do, I think, but awesome.
Yeah,
I think that's like the next level, for sure. But yeah.
So I want to ask a question that's also on everybody's mind, and we'll go ahead and do the Hayden Taylor, and then I'll kind of finish it off. Is where is Chain? At least the current iteration of Chain, the most popular iteration, the most dominant iteration, the one that did not win the calling, but
Flock of the Featherwalkers.
Yeah, it made 44% on day 2, and also won all of these Road to Nationals. What happens to that deck with these new cards, Hayden?
Well, I mean, I think the deck gets better, to be honest. Like in terms of you get opportunity to play Duskblade, but I think in a vacuum the deck gets better. I think in the format that we're going to walk into, it's going to be very different. I think to start with, the deck's still going to have a lot of success because I think the Frost decks or these like tax decks that people try to build are probably going to be very clunky to start with through weeks 1 to 2, even 3. And people are still, if people are chain players, I guess if they're abreast of what's happening in the format of these new cards coming in, they're probably going to try and alter their decks. And stay relevant in the format, which is exactly what you should do, right? You should adapt to survive. So I think we'll see, still a reasonable amount of chain to start the format with. But I think that once people start to get these builds right with the new classes and the fact that we've got so many now just heroes in the pool, that it's going to be really hard even towards the end of this format, walking into the calling, right, Brendan, we talked about the different ways we wanted to attack strategies that we thought were going to show up at Vegas. And there was things that we felt like we weren't as strong against as we were at the start of the format because people started to adapt their play. Like even the Bravo decks, like we felt, fatigue was fine, but then people started to adapt these like mid-range plans. So I think as people start to do this more with more heroes and classes, it's going to be so hard to catch all with these decks. And I just think it's gonna change to some degree. The chain deck will look different, and then I think it'll also its impact will dwindle somewhat.
Yeah, I can't really agree more. I think initially you can try to do something with Duskblade where you run 70 cards and just try to get that weapon as big as possible, as late as possible, and that becomes really hard to deal with. But I mean, you can't run 36 red cards now, you know what I mean, like, and get quad red hands and stuff. But I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Hayden, is that you always struggle building the new deck with the new hero into the old format, you know what I mean? So that's like the first challenge. Even with like Frostbite and stuff, it'll just still be harder to still play against.
I have one sort of, I completely agree. I have one sort of, I guess, semi-hot take, I guess, if people want that. But I think that what Duskblade does is actually, I actually think it makes, although I think it's an improvement in terms of the ability you have access to this, I actually think it makes people deck build better, and it's actually going to make Chain a little bit worse. And hear me out here. That's because Duskblade, basically makes it so that you can't fatigue the Chain player, right? Because they're just going to get this incremental value every single turn. If you don't put any pressure back on them, they just get to add the counters. I don't think that, that was the best way to attack that deck anyway. So I think it's going to make people approach a different deck build. And I think that's actually going to be better for for the game, to be honest. I think we're going to see these Frost decks come in and actively try and attack Chain strategy and things like that. But yeah, I think you can't sit back on Duskblade. That basically says that decks can't sit back, which is an interesting additive to the format.
I think actually Rosetta provides some interesting situations there where you get to come in for 2 and 2 basically pretty easy, right? With like a Seeds, a Bounding, a Shackle, and then just one resource, right? And you come in with that 2 Arcane, which is basically, if nobody puts in Arcane Barrier 2, is 1 free damage kind of.
Or if they do, it's they get the the armor suffers as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a weird weapon to block, Rosetta, because it's actually inefficient on both ends usually. Yeah. So blocking 2 damage with a 3 block is quite bad, and then blocking 2 Arcane with the blue when you have Null Rune 1 is also very bad. So it's an interesting kind of value weapon. I think Duskblade looks really good. I don't live in a vacuum, so I've heard the complaints already. But that's just classic. People love to just hop on the overpowered train real quick. So we will see. That weapon looks like it was printed on purpose, and it is printed in the context of the set. I think that weapon would be the best weapon, hands down, no questions, if it was printed in Monarch. But now it's probably a bit more reasonable with the other tools that came with it. I actually think that even though I've kind of seen this, these are not the results I've seen in testing, at least so far, like very, very limited testing. We're just practicing limited. I do think that the current iteration of Chain would drastically suffer with the new ice cards that are implemented, especially when it's being so I expect most of the early meta to be ice decks. It's just like low to the ground, addresses the problem in a theory-based way, and it's like a lot of people will gravitate towards that. And I think that to beat that strategy, once it gets even like a little bit refined, you're going to have to kind of change the Chain deck a lot. But then again, like the thing about Chain was that he kind of defied theory throughout Monarch. It's like there was a lot of theory that said that Chain couldn't do this or couldn't do that, and it just didn't work, right? Like Snag is just peak theory, right? Like Chain is unfair because he can stack a big Riftbind turn. So we print Snag, we make Snag the card. But if you just have Snag in your deck, like it's actually not that good because you can just play out your cards in like a very conservative way over the turns and actually very much reduce the effect of that card, which is weird. That was the one thing in Monarch that I wondered if like they printed that card, they tested it, and they're like, okay, this works, because it does work, right? It's like that you won't get Riftbinded for 50 on Shackle 9 if you have Snag, most likely. But it doesn't work in the sense that like you still just 100% freaking lose if you fatigue, and the Chain just like remotely deck stacks, right? That was Snag was probably for me that was the most interesting card of the season. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
We're getting into like philosophical territory of like deck building and things like that. A little bit, but I think
cool.
I think
I
it's,
like it.
I was just gonna say on the deck building front, I think that the deck building in this game is it's a challenge. It's not an easy thing to do, and so many I think people talk about decks and matchups from so many different perspectives, and that's because their deck building is so different, right? They're playing different sets of cards to other players, or they're playing in a different strategy to other players, so their conversations, they can really clash sometimes, I think, with like opinions, because people are playing certain matchups in a certain way. And I think we saw that across the weekend. I saw that with how people were discussing the event, whether it be on like social media or even in the chat, things like that. So I do agree, Brendan, and I think that that card did impact the format, right? It definitely impacted this format that we've just gone through. If that card wasn't printed, it would look very different.
Yeah, it's like a nuclear deterrent, right? Like people have to run it
Such a
at
good
some
analogy.
point in some decks, or else it just gets out of control, right?
Yeah.
If you didn't have to play around that, then it would be like, early in the format when you're like Riftbind for 18, and it has go again, and 7 arcane damage. You have to, that card has to be in to like keep things regular enough
Yeah.
to be able to play stuff.
For
sure.
me, the conversation is less like player based, and I wonder from a design standpoint. And we're not going to go into it. I promise. I'm just going to say.
Let's
From
get
a
into
Brendan
design
can tell I'm
standpoint,
trying to avoid things a little bit.
Yeah. If it was printed and they were like, "Yep, that works," because it looks like whatever there's definitely a problem that happens if Snag doesn't exist. You just rift-bind people for 50 every turn. It's like an OTK deck, basically. Like, okay, but Snag solves that problem, but doesn't solve the problem, right? Which is that if you try to just defend out against chain, it doesn't work, like 99% of the time. And like I think that's what I found most interesting about the cards. Like, I wonder if like the testing came here and they're like, okay, Snag obviously fixes that, and then I don't know if it like kept going, and they saw it like happen.
My take on Snag is that it's just a tool, right? It's just like a card we have printed for forever, that can work in a variety of scenarios.
Sure.
And that
Yeah.
I don't think it's a direct like, we have this and it'll help like the power level of chain, right?
I agree with you on that one.
That's my take on that.
Yeah.
Is that
And
I
they
think
wrote an article about that card as well, about the design space of that card and how it was printed for kind
Long-term.
of for future sets, right? That
Yeah.
and Feign Death.
Yeah, and Feign Death. Hell yeah.
Okay.
I think we won't know the full scope of kind of this block until we get that third supplemental set. Once that comes out, I think that is going to like round out the whole design of once we get talents, right? Like that's kind of what happens in Crucible, right? Is that we get all of these like kind of niche cards to help kind of all of the heroes, the majority of them and stuff, and makes the game much more well-rounded, I think. And then we should see that for these 7 heroes as well, I think.
Yeah, or some sort of amalgamation of that, right? Because they always, every time something looks like it's like, yeah, we'll just get support for the heroes that didn't get it. It's like they just flip it on their head and they're like, okay, boom, we got a bard and we got we've got a sniper or something. Like, what?
The wizard supplemental set is coming in hot.
Yeah,
it's so interesting. I feel like sometimes I shy away from these conversations, and it's interesting having you on here, Taylor, because I think that sometimes I feel like I don't want to talk about chain too much, just because I feel like it just is such a topic of conversation every time. But the more that we're sitting here with you now and having this conversation, it is the deck that defined the last format, whether people want to talk about it or
100%.
not. Like it is what warped the meta. Every deck that people built was to attack chain. Anyone that was going to an event and wanted to win had to have a plan to beat chain. So I think it's important to talk about what that means for the future of the game as well. Like is this similar to, because to me it feels different, right? Like Dash in the Crucible format, like that was really popular and it was one of the best decks in the format, but I don't think that it was actually as defining as Chain has been in the Monarch format. And it's really hard to say because the player base was smaller, the game was less developed. But from my experiences, that is my true belief, there was decks that could really prey on that Dash deck. So it's an interesting discussion to have, I think, and I'm really interested to see what happens with these texts. I don't think we're going to have a hero from this set, for instance, that has quite that same impact. But what I think we're going to have is we're going to have probably 2 heroes that come in, and the way they play into the game and the way the hero works and operates from the design space starts to balance some of the aggressiveness that we've had from the previous format, and actually brings into it with it alongside it, brings up these other heroes like you talked about Eviscerate. I think my early take is that Reinhardt probably has some probably has a better time in this format, for instance. So yeah, we'll see. It's an interesting conversation, and I'm actually glad now that we're having it, that we are having it.
Yeah, I do want to say like a caveat, because like we are talking about Chain, and it's like it's weird in the context that Chain didn't win the calling, and I'm not trying to take anything away from that. I just like the reason why it's a good topic of discussion is just for how warping it was on the meta. Like we just saw the percentage of people playing it. Like obviously it was only 22%. It's actually way less than we expected the calling. We saw 44% conversion, which is nuts. And I also thought like chain was not unbeatable by any means. It was just so safe, right? Like you could just bring it into the most blind meta, like, and not know like exactly, what percentage of what hero would be on, and you'd be so okay, right? But like if you brought something else, you usually had a couple bad maps where in chain it kind of felt like you were over 50 on everything, which is like, for me, that's why it was so defining. It was like, it just felt like the safer pick a lot of time. Not that it was like literally unbeatable or anything like that.
Yeah, and it makes everybody have to be way more proactive.
Oh yeah.
Right? Where that's not how the game had previously been, is that you could, kind of play a mid-rangey game and, set yourself up where, chain, makes everybody else have to play that game, which, is totally super meta defining. In regards to the calling in that, we kind of see like the snake eat itself. You know what I mean? Like there's a version of chain that you and Dante and myself are kind of on, that has a particular game plan into everything, and then there's like another chain deck out there that kind of like has the potential to just totally smash whatever I was doing, and that happened to me twice. Like I just got high rolled harder than I'd ever been. And that's because we have chain, right? Like there's a world where you build chain and you're like, cool, it has this like mechanic where I can just go freaking bananas. I'm just going to lean into that even more, but then it suffers in like other matchups, but then has like the potential to just like, crush any deck all of the sudden,
It's a redeeming
if that makes
quality.
sense.
Yeah, it's a redeeming quality for the design of the hero, the fact that it was able to be built in multiple ways and be extremely successful.
Yeah.
Because I actually think that the two ways that we saw, the two dominant ways, were actually quite different. But like both had pluses and minuses, right? I think that's really interesting, and that was definitely what made the format more interesting. It's not everybody was on the same deck. I mean, we're not even talking about like, hey, they switched out like 3 cards. They were like whole entire kind of like ideological differences, which is really interesting. You saw it be successful on both ends. So both kind of thinking parties were correct in their own way, which was really interesting.
I did just want to say as well, going back to the event and what happens at the end of that format with, and a big congratulations again to Tyler for taking that out. The one thing that he said that I thought was super interesting is that he said, I felt really confident in every matchup that wasn't chain, and then I went away and came up with a plan with chain, and I think you saw how that was a product of what was happening in the format, right? Where he goes, okay, if I have a deck that I know I'm just like, I feel like I can cruise the Swiss, and then I play into chains, but I have this really strong game plan, and I think against most of the chains I'm going to be able to beat them. And we saw that. I think he said he went 7-1 against chain. Then you've actually got a plan in there, right? That is preying on what the format has become, because he's almost like he's metagamed it in a different way to how a lot of other people did it. But he I guess took a deck that he felt could just beat anything that wasn't chain, and then I have a matchup against chain, and I'm probably good. Maybe there's some players out there who it might not work into, but for general, he felt good. So that's really interesting, and we're going to see more of that going forward. I think if we had a longer season of the of Mono Constructed, we probably would have seen, like Prism would grow, right? Like we'd see a lot of Tyler's deck come out into the meta, and then do we see a little bit more of adaptiveness, which maybe we didn't quite get to because of the shortened season, just due to Monarch coming out and then us not really getting any events until the end of the life cycle.
I totally agree with that, and plus it's like a good strategy to be like, okay, the only deck I only have to really turn it on against one deck, and that's got to be like very calming, right? Whereas for me, I kind of felt a bit of anxiety every round because I'm on chain and I'm like, everybody's coming for me, type of deal. So it's like I always had to be on, and maybe that's because I had to go like X and 1 to make day 2 as well. But
you're also like statistically very probable to play a ton of mirrors, which just doesn't feel good for anybody, I think.
Yeah.
But speaking of that, like I have to mention, even though we're coming to the tail end of this, Taylor here played 2 Kanos in Swiss, and he did not have Null Rune 3. So speaking of decks that you kind of, maybe you weren't super prepared for, I was just blown away. And it was in pretty late rounds as well, right?
Yeah, kinda. It was like
Well, Well, it wasn't round 1, so it's
Yeah. It was round 3 and round 4,
Yeah,
or
I think
maybe
they were back to
5.
back.
I think it was round 3 and round 5.
Mhm.
Because I think I played Azalea, Bravo, Kano, Bravo, Kano. I think is how it went. But yeah, it was Wildcats. I was pretty thankful for my other teammate Mitch. He also brought Kano, and he was like, "Hey, can we get in some like? I'll play some games right now, last minute testing, like on Thursday night or Wednesday night, or I can't remember when." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Like, I'll help my buddy out. This isn't really helping me out." And it was so helpful. Oh my god. Like just knowing a bit more of what to do in that matchup. Like I had Null Rune 1, right? I had the crown for in case I played Viserai. So I just like blocked basically everything I could afford to, and it worked out.
Ooh, I made Brendan and Dante play the Null 3.
Oh, I was all for it.
Yeah.
Totally. They told me afterwards, and I was like, God, that's so much smarter than what I did. Because I definitely had the space to do it, you know?
It's just whether you think you're gonna play it right. But I think in an open field, I was like, the one thing that, and I know Brendan was massive on this as well. I was like, the one thing you don't want to like just get spiked by is like a Kano in round 2 or something. It's like that's not where you want to be.
Yeah, totally.
And he saw it in round 5. That was a 5-0 Kano. Like that's crazy.
Kano made it to day 2, right? Alexander Vore took Kano to I think pretty high up on the tables. Yeah.
I didn't know that it was Alexander Vore. Yeah, he used to play a lot of gauntlets.
Yeah. So good job.
Yeah.
Congrats to him. I think
it's like the one matchup too that's like really out of your hands, you know?
Yeah.
When you only have one Null Rune.
It is, You're really going to the casino at that point at that one Null Rune. You just want to hit good and hope they don't hit, multiple strong flare turns.
Yeah.
I got
to the face.
Yeah, I got back-to-back spindled for 8 with Stir.
That's pretty reasonable though. If you got 8th flared, you were dead.
Yeah.
yeah, totally. But he got to set one hand up. He opted 7 cards and then did it again. And I was like, I'm dead.
Lived through that.
I'm dead for sure. Yeah, he just didn't find it. But I mean, I think, that's the difference between you guys and me is that you guys have that like extra little level of experience to like hedge your bets a little bit more. And I definitely, like in that brief conversation, was like, oh yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing here. Like,
at least you got the playtesting in,
Jesus, yeah. And that's like how thin of a margin it feels like, for my first calling is just like, I happened to get some Kano playtesting in, so I was like okay in Swiss, and then like, you also might not run into any of your bad matchups and stuff. It's just wild to be, I don't know.
Yeah.
All of that stuff is just so crazy that's part of the game. It's blowing my mind.
Same with the way the calling was structured. I heard so many different paths through day 1. Like I heard, I played 8. I played 7 chains, or like someone was like, oh, I played 0 chains. There was just so many just crazy ways through Swiss because there was just, or at least through day 1, there was just so many people. There's so many. When you got to round 5, there's so many 5-0s. It was incredible.
Yeah, you end up with 6-7 O's at the end. Like that, you're in a little secret. This doesn't change to events that you play. It's always going to be like this in large events because the amount, and that's why I do think that like having a well-rounded deck heading into an event, unless you just kind of want to go, well, I just hope to dodge this matchup is a little bit dicey because there's a lot of players and there's you have percentage chances to get matched up into them. It's not like heading to your locals where you go like, oh, I know no one plays Kano. I know there's max 1 Kano. It's like you just don't know.
Yeah, totally. It's just wild that's part of the game to me.
Cool. I love it. It's awesome.
Yeah. It makes it way more fun, compared to like, because I come from like a sports background and you like watch 7 games of the same team play a different people and you scout like all of their stuff, and then you come into that one game like after weeks of prepared practices and you're super prepared for this matchup and stuff, and like it's not like that at the calling at all.
No, it's fine.
You just got to be, it's crazy.
Awesome. So Taylor, I want to thank you so much again for coming and joining us on Time of the Round this week. Before we head out though, I want you to close us out with your socials, your podcast, where to find you, and all that. had good stuff.
We do these ones as
Sure.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, derailed me there. Yeah, thanks guys for having me on. I'm like really honored to be on, and your podcast is a staple in my rotation. So appreciate that. Keep up the good work. But so yeah, I'm one half of the Attack Action podcast, and you can find us on Spotify, Google, and Apple. And then we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Gmail at the Attack Action Podcast. And you can find me on Twitter.
There we go.
At Battle Bro Taylor.
Figured out how to use another boomer has joined the Twitter sphere. I like it.
Yeah, it's pretty easy. You just retweet everything you guys tweet, and that works out.
Awesome. Well, we definitely enjoyed having you on. Interesting conversations. I know we went into dangerous territory for Hayden talking about Snag there, but we powered through it. So thank you everyone so much for listening, and we will see you all next week.